So I must say it is a real pleasure, personal pleasure, in fact, to welcome Jan-Bart Gewald, to whom I have to say I owe a lot, and whom I consider one of my few real academic mates. So welcome, Jan-Bart, and I'm glad you're part of this project, and I'm delighted that you will contribute to this volume, to the Bologna workshop, and then the volume which will emerge out of it. Jan-Bart is a student of the great Robert Ross, also known as Roberto Rossi. Is a professor of African history at Leiden University and a Southern Africa specialist. Now, I must say it is a bit difficult to even begin to summarize his extensive research record. Let me just say that, otherwise we'll be here until tomorrow, but let me just say that after spending quite a few years working on Namibia, and in the process writing a celebrated famous book on the genocide of the Herero, in the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken, Jan-Bart shifted his interest towards colonial Zambia, co-editing a couple of seminal collections, and working predominantly, though not exclusively, on the impact of the First World War on what was then Northern Rhodesia. More recently, Jan-Bart has moved to South Africa and environmental history. Again, please do correct me if I'm wrong. And is currently writing a book on diamond mining in Kimberley. And I think today's paper is a bit of a spin-off, as it were, of this broader project. Jan-Bart's articles have appeared in several prestigious journals, the Journal of African History, the International Journal of African Historical Studies, Journal of Southern African Studies, and many more besides. So I think I'll leave it at this, and I think Jan-Bart has agreed to speak for approximately 45 minutes, and then he'll take questions. So over to you, Jan-Bart, entertain us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. Thank you very much for your very kind words. Yes, you're right. Today, I'm going to be talking about Kimberley. Yes, this is part and parcel of a spin-off from my work, but for those of you who have no idea where the Groot Gat, the big hole, there's a double entendre in there. Groot Gat has a double meaning in Afrikaans. But where Kimberley is will be shown to you now on the following slide. It works. There we go. So the place I'm talking about, Kimberley, is here, slap bang in the middle of South Africa, right here. And it's in this place that between 1870 up until the 1920s, thousands upon thousands of people worked and dug a big hole. And the big hole dug became this massive hole in the middle of the town of Kimberley that is associated with it. And I'll be talking about the relationship between guns, diamonds, and labor. And I want to start off with two quotes. One from Gwaji Chamshashe, who was a congregational church missionary in Kimberley in 1872. And he wrote, and I'm sorry, I have to stop here quickly because I want to say something, and that is, I see that this is being recorded, so I have to, in the keeping with the modern times, give a trigger warning that please note that the terms and sentiments expressed by cited sources are not mine, and neither that my use thereof indicates that I condone them. So having said that, I will continue with my quotes. So Chamshashe says, the natives from further up in the interior have no other object in coming here than securing a gun for themselves. And William Morton, an American who was a digger and a traveler in the area of Kimberley, wrote in 1876, quote, "These natives have been pouring in crowds into the diamond fields for 7 years at the rate of 30,000 a year. Each gang from 30 to 40 men, after a journey on foot, often of 1,000 miles, during which many of them die from starvation and cold, remaining and working only about 3 months, just long enough to supply each member of it with gun and ammunition, and then returning to their land. They carry back no money, but simply a gun, and they come for nothing else. The English government permits the sale of guns to them indiscriminately, and it is a well-established fact that 300,000 of them have been thus disposed of." End quote. Now, my lecture today deals with diamonds, labor, and guns. The brilliant South African historian, Christian de Kiewiet, wrote in the early 1930s, "Guns brought laborers." Now, the historian Rob Turrell has shown that the banning of the sale of arms, of firearms, led to an increase in diamond smuggling. So when the sale of firearms to African laborers was prohibited, there was a sudden increase in diamond smuggling. And the mining magnates, so the people who owned the mines and who worked the mines, argued that it was to prevent diamond smuggling that closed compounds were developed in Kimberley. Now, previous historians working on Kimberley, William Werger and Rob Turrell, have specifically said that the arguments put forward by the mine owners, that the mining compounds had been established to prevent the smuggling of diamonds and the theft of diamonds, William Werger and Rob Turrell said that this was a fob argument, that this argument did not hold, and the only reason for the development of the closed compounds was for the control of labor and the ensuring of cheap and reliable supplies of labor. Ian Phimister, in a review article that I recently came across, refutes this and says, well, you know, the compounds of the Witwatersrand, which were not closed compounds, show that you can control labor without having closed compounds. So the argument put forward by Turrell and Werger that the compounds were only created to bring down the price of labor cannot be right. And I like this argument because I was so dumbfounded. I was really surprised to discover that Cecil John Rhodes, hardly a, to use the term of the time, friend of the natives, that Cecil John Rhodes was firmly opposed to the disarmament and the prohibiting of the sale of firearms to Africans in Kimberley. So my paper deals with this, and I will have to try and take you through to where this place is that we're talking about. We're going to be talking about a place that becomes known as Griqualand West. But before we get there, let me just go here. And this is a map of the Cape Colony as it existed in 1851. In 1851, sorry, 1851. And you can see that actually it isn't much bigger than the furthest extent of the Cape under English, under Dutch rule 50 years earlier. To be sure, there's these places here, Albany, Somerset, which have been added to the Cape Colony, but the colony hasn't really expanded that much. In fact, the colony is economically moribund. And then something starts happening in this area up here. And let me just zoom in on that. Specifically, just around that bend there. This is the Vaal River as it comes down to join the Orange River. And here in 1867, a diamond rush starts. A diamond rush starts on both sides of the Vaal. On the one side, this side here, is the missionary station called Neil. And on the other side is a place called Klipdrift, not the brandy, but basically rocky ford or stone ford, and which will eventually become Berkeley West. And it's at this place where the Vaal River has left enormous alluvial deposits of diamonds. And within the space of a few months, thousands upon thousands of people traveled to this place to start looking and digging for diamonds. And we have a very romanticized image of some of these early diggers in the 1870s. But be that as it may, these diggers needed labor. The labor came from further afield in Southern Africa. So I need some indication from somebody that, can you see my cursor move around here? Please, somebody say yes or no.
Yes, I see the cursor.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
The area we're talking about is right here, still at that stage beyond the Cape Colony, in the area that becomes known as Griqualand West. And the labor is being drawn from this area here, the area that would later become Basutoland, and all the way up into what is the Northern Transvaal, the Bapedi of Sekhukhune, the Swazi, the Zulu, all coming down, as it were, along a corridor which passes through Lesotho, through Griqualand West. This carries on for a couple of years, and new diamonds are being found almost all the time. In 1871, diamonds are being found in an area just to the south of the Vaal River in what they call the dry diggings. And in 1871, a newspaper report has the following report. The new rush at De Beers, so De Beers is the name of the farm and will later become the name of the biggest diamond company in the world. The new rush at De Beers, about a mile from the old camp, is by all accounts turning out splendidly. A vast number of persons have already flocked there, and we hear of marvelous finds, but have as yet few authenticated particulars. There can, however, be no doubt as to the prolific nature of the rush, and they were right. Underneath a camel thorn tree, on top of a small hillock, on top of a koppie, at a place which would become known as New Rush, diamonds were found. And this is a drawing by a woman who'd come up from Grahamstown in July of 1871. showing the first diggings on what was then known as Gilfillan's Kopje. The following slide shows the burgeoning town that develops. So on the left-hand side, we have diggings at Pitoispan. In the far background, we have the Kopje and the diggings on the Kopje. And I don't know if you can see it properly, but these are flags flying above tents, and these flags indicate diamond buyers. And diamond buyers are buying diamonds for cash, for goods, but also for weapons. The diamond fields at this stage lie beyond the Cape Colony. They're still on a frontier zone beyond the Cape Colony, in an area which is contested between the Orange Free State, the Cape Colony, the Griqua, and the South African Republic. In 1871, Griqualand West is declared as a colony which is administered directly from London. So it's not part of the Cape Colony at this stage. At this stage, it is still independent of the Cape Colony, and it's administered directly from London. After 1880, this changes and it becomes part of the Cape Colony, and it becomes Griqualand West. And you can see on this map here that Kimberley and the diamond fields are connected and are part and parcel of the Cape Colony and not part of the Orange Free State. And you see this beautiful straight drawn line, making sure that the diamond fields are in Griqualand West and the Cape Colony. In Kimberley itself, or New Rush, the hillock, the Kopje, is being dug away. This is in the beginning of 1872, so this is 6 months after the first drawings I showed you. And the next drawing, the next photograph is 9 months after. These blocks, if you can see these blocks, are all individual claims. The claims were 30 by 30 feet, and people, obviously being people, would work at different speeds, and the claims go down, down, down at different speeds into the mine. These lines you see are not scratches on the negative or on the photograph. These lines are actually cables which extend from workings at the side down to the actual claims. This mine becomes the richest diamond mine in the world. 22 million tons of earth are moved from this mine, and in exchange 2.2 tons, 2.2 metric tons of gem quality diamonds are mined, and we are left with this, the groot gat, the big hole, the center of the universe in Kimberley. Now, how did this take place? People don't start working for nothing. People are prepared to work in exchange for various goods. And in the Southern African context of the 1860s and 1870s, the most valuable good that one could get hold of was firearms. Now, in the written text, I have a whole discussion about the importance of firearms in African societies, and I won't go into that now. But there's an important thing that happens, particularly in Europe, between 1867 and 1875. Between 1867 and 1875, so exactly the same time that we're talking about here, the European armies rearm with metallic cartridge breech loaders. So from being musket-loaded firearms, they become metallic cartridge breech loaders. And what happens is that literally millions of military firearms become obsolete. And they get dumped onto the world market. A little bit exactly the same as what happened after the Warsaw Pact ended and firearms are dumped onto Africa after the end of the Cold War. And this change did not go unnoticed in Southern Africa. From the 1870s onwards, all conflicts fought by colonial forces in Southern Africa are fought with breech loaders. And African polities actively sought breech loader rifles, but generally remained reliant on muskets. And more often than not, African forces continued to be outnumbered in terms of firearms. And it was in an effort to redress this imbalance that thousands upon thousands of men debate and entered into the migrant labor system to acquire firearms. Frederick Boyle, a traveler who was at the New Rush, that is at Kimberley, in 1871, wrote, "I suppose no less than 20,000 rifles, mostly as good arms as one could find, have been sold to natives working at the diamond fields. 10,000 is the lowest estimate I have ever heard from those storekeepers who would give me an opinion. It is to buy a gun that Kaffirs cheerfully undergo a whole year's risk and labor in the claims. Scarcely a man leaves this work without one. I have met returning Zulus and Korana in the veld by 20s in a company, everyone armed." Quickly to this slide here, this is a person called John Poole, who has at the beginning a hotel, read brothel at Klipdrift, so what becomes Berkeley West, in which he sells all manner of merchandise, but also gunpowder, lead, and other ammunition. And then underneath that, for sale in exchange for diamonds, a buckwagon and several double-barreled guns. In what becomes Kimberley, we also have shops selling firearms to everybody, irrespective of who they are. Now, De Kiewiet had this, the historian De Kiewiet had this little phrase. He said, quote, "The guns in the hands of furtive knots of Basotho, who scurried through the Free State to Basotholand on their way from the diamond fields," end quote. These guns ensured the victory of Basotho forces against not only the Orange Free State, but also against the British Empire, against British forces sent against them. Lesotho, as it exists at the moment, could only have come about through the firearms earned by Basotho workers on the Kimberley gold fields, diamond fields, but also on the taxation which was carried out by Moshoeshoe on returning workers going through Basotho land on their way to Sekhukhune land and Sekhukhune. In 1879, the former Lieutenant Governor of the Cape Colony, Sir Arthur Thurlow Cunningham, wrote of his experiences at the Cape, and he described the impact which resulted from the discovery of diamonds. Quote, "To make them work, only one inducement was effectual: the permission to purchase firearms." And he continues, companies of natives marched home, each bearing his musket over his shoulder. Instances occurred in which justice of the peace granted permits to natives in reckless profusion in order to curry favor with traders. The government set the example. Blinded by a desire for cheap labor, the colonists allowed the natives to arm until at least 400,000 muskets and rifles, some of them breech loaders, had been acquired. End quote. On the diamond fields proper, in the contested frontier zone that became Griekenland West, an effective free-for-all existed as far as the trade in firearms was concerned. Traveler Peyton, who traveled to the fields in 1876, wrote about the easy availability of firearms for sale at the fields. Quote, "With regard to weapons, it is not absolutely necessary to bring out any, as plenty can be bought at fair prices on the fields. But for anyone who intends to shoot much, I would recommend a Henry Express rifle and a good 12-bore muzzle-loading smoothbore. About 5 or 6 pounds is the price a double-barrel smoothbore will fetch by auction, apparently almost irrespective of quality or maker's name." End quote. And what is interesting here is that the price named between 5 and 6 pounds appears to have been the same amount paid by migrant laborers for the firearms that they were purchasing on the fields. In addition, as many authors indicate, laborers only stayed on the fields for as long as it took to earn sufficient funds to be able to buy a firearm. The German traveler von Weber summed it up as follows, and this is my translation. Quote, "All the wild and barbaric blacks who travel 2 or 3 months from the interior of Africa to the diamond fields to hire themselves out as workers have only one goal in mind: to earn enough to buy a gun. As soon as they have worked together to earn the necessary 6 pounds, and at the current wage level of 10 shillings a week, including board, this takes about 3 months. They buy their long-desired treasure, the gun, and return home with it. In this way, hundreds of thousands of guns have been bought here by the Kaffirs over the last 2 years and taken home." And that's end quote. And this is a photograph. This is an image taken from not from Weber, but from Holub. And Holub is the next one I want to refer to. Holub was a Czech traveler who wrote, "Of the thousands of black men who at the time acted as servants in the diamond fields, the majority belonged to the Basutu, Zulu, and Transvaal Bechuana tribes. They earned from 7 shillings 6pence to 10 shillings a week, and rarely stayed more than 6 months at the diggings, for as soon as they had saved enough to buy a gun, which would seldom cost more than 4 pounds, and about 5 pounds of powder at 3 shillings per pound, a few bullets and caps, a woolen garment or two, and perhaps a hat, they consider themselves quite in a position to return to their homes." Now, Charles Peyton, another digger, describing the laborers who came to work on the diamond fields, gives us an insight into the thinking and ideas that were prevalent amongst the white diggers, and appears to have substantiated and exacerbated Eastern Cape and Natal settler sentiments. Quote, "The greatest ambition of every seems to be to buy a gun. When a native has served long enough on the fields to enable him to buy 5 or 10 pounds for a gun or rifle, he shoulders his weapon and turns his face towards the ancestral kraals, a happy man. Some, it is true, are not so careful. They yield to the white vices of drinking and gambling, etc., and are often found in choki, that is jail, often changing masters and never saving money, end quote. Now, the traders who are selling firearms at the diamond fields employ touts to advertise their wares. And some of the comments I've read here are, Tenga Isibama, is buy a gun in isiZulu. Reka Tlolobo, buy a gun in Setswana. Reka Situnya, buy a gun in Sesotho. Reka Reka Monamacheka, buy, in other words, a shop, gun here in Setswana. And he describes, quote, on these occasions, the camp was converted into a regular pandemonium by the yelling of the crowds of excited Africans examining guns and firing off caps, and touts of the shopkeepers shouting to them, Tenga isibam, buy a gun. Another digger describes in a detailed overview the manner in which firearms were displayed and sold to migrant laborers in Kimberley. Quote, one of the sights of the camp was the huge piles of guns stacked in front of the many shops on stands, sometimes 4 or 5 tiers high. Besides the guns, there were also bayonets, powder flasks, and boxes of percussion caps laid out in tempting array so as to attract the attention of the boys as they passed along the streets, end quote. So touts shouted, buy a gun in isiZulu, Setswana, and Sesotho, and they urged laborers to buy their rifles at specific traders. Rifles were bought in a form of hire purchase. Traders would provide percussion caps free of charge to prospective purchasers and allow them to pick and choose from amongst the firearms that they had on offer. Prospective buyers would be permitted to select a weapon, arm it with a percussion cap, and then shoot. Once a choice had been made and a down payment made, the firearm would be labeled and put aside until such time that the payment could be made in full. James Benjamin Taylor, a digger who was also in Kimberley, describes the sale of weapons in the following manner, quote, at knockoff time, our natives used to pass down streets of tented shops owned by white traders and presided over by yelling black salesmen, whirling guns over their heads. These they discharged in the air, a deafening din, a sight never to be forgotten. The small shopkeepers used in these days to bring up wagon loads of antiquated muzzle-loading rifles for sale to the Kaffirs, who frequently were met along the road, proceeding to their homes armed to the teeth, an old gun, a canister, a powder, a bar of lead, and a bullet mold. And Frederick Boyle describes his surprise at seeing the extent of the weapons being sold at New Rush, that is present-day Kimberley. Quote, on the Monday morning, I saw a sight which was calculated to startle one.
That's it.
What's up?
Eh?
Sorry, what's up?
Radiate, can you please switch off your mic? Yeah, thank you. Yes, Jan, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So Frederick Boyle describes seeing something that really surprises him. There was a vast, quote, it was a vast sale of rifles at the store of Monsieur Reed. Those who bought were Kuranas and Kaffirs, the street appeared to be possessed by a Negro army. Round the shops were a crowd of hundreds pressing in. From its open doors, a stream of armed men struggled out ceaselessly. Each carried a rifle, some with the bayonet screwed on. The purchase hung around the outskirts of the crowd, comparing the merit of their respective arms, until a body of 18 or 20 were collected. They then marched away in line. So fast the bargains were concluded, these groups seemed to file past in a grotesque parade. Many of them had no covering. Those were the Zulus. But every man carried an excellent rifle, tower-marked, one of the muzzle-loading Enfields discarded by the English army. They were sold at £3 and £3 5 with a bayonet. It was stated that 500 stand had been disposed of that morning. End quote. The abundance, availability, and sale of firearms was not without its dangers. Charles Peyton describes Boers getting drunk and shooting one another after diamond fields. John Ango describes cases in which the discharge of weapons had unintended consequences. Quote, "The continual snapping of caps on the guns in the streets was not unattended by much danger. On one occasion, while thus engaged, an unsuspecting African, in placing a cap on the nipple of one of the many muskets, pulled the trigger, as he had done on scores of other guns, when, to the surprise of everyone in the neighborhood, there was a loud report, and a man standing fell backwards, shot through the breast. The gun had been loaded with powder and ball, but by whom or how long previously, no one knew. For aught anyone knew, it may have been one of the old muskets used in the frontier wars." In another instant, Angove describes sitting in front of his tent and reading a novel and having sand knocked into his face, and then seeing that a charging rod had been shot accidentally. Now, who were these people who had these various shops that sold this stuff? Let's just take a look at this man here, William Hume. The code is in here, suitable for dealers or the native, and then 20,000 Eli's military percussion caps. William Hume is the son of 1820 settlers in the Eastern Cape. His biography coyly notes that he was good at business, and he made a fortune on the diamond fields. He then continues as a politician, calling for the Eastern Cape colony to be a separate colony. So he's an Eastern Cape separatist. He runs foul of his other separatists when they basically argue about whether the capital should be in Grahamstown or in Port Elizabeth. But what's interesting about this is that Hume and other traders, and I've discussed this with my students before, make their fortune in Kimberley, not so much through the diamonds, but it's in the trade. And a major aspect of this trade is diamonds. Is firearms, is the selling of firearms. In 1879, Griqualand West, as an independent colony directly administered from London, shifts and becomes directly administered by the Cape Colony. And one of the first things that happens is that the Cape Colony tries to curtail the sale of firearms in the Griqualand West colony. But when Griqualand West becomes part of the Cape Colony, a particular man also enters into Parliament. And this is Cecil John Rhodes, a young man who has made his money on the diamond fields, and he literally buys his seat in Parliament, very much like Elon Musk. But what really surprised me is that in his first address to the Cape Parliament, Cecil John Rhodes mobilizes his background and his voters against the disarmament of African labor. 12 years later, when Pondoland is annexed to the Cape Colony, and at that stage, Cecil John Rhodes is Prime Minister, Cecil John Rhodes also argues against the disarmament of the people in Pondoland. But in 1881, so in his first address to the Parliament, he says, first of all, he talks about the fact that many of the Sotho are working in the mines and that he needs them to work in the mines. And then he says, after all, we sold them the guns. They bought them out of their hard-earned wages, and it is hard lines to make them give them up again. Nonetheless, the sale of arms in Griqualand West is curtailed by the Cape Colony and the Cape Colonial Administration. And the Cape Colonial Administration enters into war with Basutoland in the famous gun war. This basically leads to a complete collapse in labor coming to Kimberley. Added to this, a Boer commando has intercepted returning Sotho workers moving across the Orange Free State. In the words of a German commentator, quote, the Boers engaged them in what was effectively a small battle and a firmly kleine schlacht, and several people were killed. And there's a sudden collapse of labor coming from eastern Southern Africa. And basically labor supply dries up completely in Kimberley. In all of this, the supply of African labor to Kimberley waxes and wanes to the extent that it was not beneficial to the profit motives of the shareholders of the increasingly centralized and highly capitalized mining companies. In 1885, the first closed compounds, so basically they need labor for this. This is the big hole in 1882. And this line that you can see here, I don't know if you can see it properly, but this is people moving up out of the mine at the end of a shift. This is before you have shaft mining. This is right at the end of the big hole. 1885, closed compounds in which laborers are housed without any contact to the outside world for periods of 3 months and increments of 3 months are established. And these closed compounds are established primarily, I would argue, to prevent the smuggling of diamonds, because in the closing down of the arms trade, there wasn't much incentive to people to be on the diamond fields. Smuggling diamonds made it possible to acquire firearms. And it was to prevent that the closed compounds were established. And if you had any doubts about the security of these mines, this is a photograph from one of the diamond mines in Kimberley. This is a triple electric fence surrounding Bultfontein mine, which is part of Rhodes's consolidated diamond mines. So I'll end here. Thank you very much. And once again, let me emphasize that all my references in the citations are not mine. I do not express sentiments with them. So thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jan-Bart. Truly a wonderful paper. I'm deeply jealous, I must say, of your amazing quotes. Fantastic stuff. I mean, you'll have to share them, my friend. But anyway, I'll really, really very entertaining. Okay. I'll probably kickstart with before as you say, opening the floor to question, I'll kickstart with just a quick request for further clarification. You say that your talk wouldn't deal with African usages of firearms, fine. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that without, firing all of your ammunitions, as it were, for Bologna. But perhaps you could anticipate some of your conclusions, particularly, did you get a sense that different groups were using guns differently? I mean, you mentioned Zulu, Lesotho, and so on and so forth. Did you get a sense that guns fulfill different functions among these various groups? Or is that perhaps something that you haven't looked into yet? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giacomo, for the question. If I want to keep you on board, I would say, yes, I noticed very strongly that the Ngoni didn't use the guns for warfare, but that they used them for display purposes. Honestly, from what I see, and I haven't been looking into that specifically, but I do know that the Hlubi chief, Langa Lilibela, or I'm sorry, I mispronounced the name completely. He is sometimes classified as being Zulu. In the present, he would be classified as being Zulu. At the time, he would not see himself as being Zulu. He'd see himself as being Hlubi. Langa Libalele. What's interesting is that he has firearms, and there's clearly that there are other chiefs in what would be Zululand, Natal, are also sending off people to go and get firearms. And what's interesting is that Shepstone, who was the Secretary for Native Affairs in Natal, 3 of his sons are in Kimberley, and his sons are selling firearms to Africans. And Shepstone basically says that Langa Lele has to hand in his firearms. You can see amongst Zulu associated with Quechua, I do not come across them in the archives as much as I would see with lesser polities in Natal. So it's very possible that Zulu proper, so Zulu specific, Zulu subject to Quechua, would not have been there, would not have been acquiring firearms. We know that after Isandlwana, firearms are used at Rorke's Drift, but we also know that they weren't used properly, which is at complete loggerhead with what we know from Sikakuni land, where firearms are used to deadly effect, and people know exactly about all manner of things associated with fields of fire and so forth. Exactly the same is true for the Tswana polities. The Tswana polities are employing ex-British military men to teach them how to use firearms and to use fields of fire and that kind of stuff. So I think there might be something in that, but I haven't really looked into it yet. And at the moment, I'm speaking off the cuff. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, let's hear somebody else, please. Any questions? You're remarkably silent. Okay. So
which is a frightening thing. As soon as people are remarkably silent, that means it's either total, utter shit, and they didn't understand anything I said.
No.
Which worries me at the moment.
Oh, well, I'll carry on then. So, but basically, you're talking about, so in essence, the story you're saying, this massive amount of gun trade takes place throughout the 70s, right? And then somehow it stops, right? Because perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on the concluding part of the paper.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
when you say that the gun sales are curtailed, what exactly does it mean? That it becomes impossible for laborers to obtain them, or rather you try and smuggle diamonds with which to then obtain guns? Where from? And also, and the other interesting thing is that he seems to say, second point, that there's a significant trade in the 70s, both in muskets, presumably predominantly percussion locks, but also in breech loaders, or in any case, more advanced type of firearms, double barreled and so on. Perhaps you can say a bit more about that.
Okay, there's two things. First thing is, between 1865 and 1880, the area we're talking about, the area which becomes known as Griekenland West, there is effectively a free-for-all trade. And this free-for-all trade doesn't really, if you go back to looking at the Cape, when the British arrive at the Cape, the monopoly on the import of firearms and gunpowder is done away with. And there's this sharp increase suddenly in the trade of firearms and gunpowder into the Cape. The Cape Colonial Administration attempts to limit this through the registration of firearms and so forth. But beyond the colony, people are allowed to export their weapons through the colony. Exactly the same happens for Natal, which is a separate colony at the time. And it's in this period of time that the towns of Pietermaritzburg and Grahamstown develop, becoming entrepôts for goods from all over central Southern Africa, which have been hunted. So I'm talking about hides, I'm talking about ivory, I'm talking about meat, I'm talking about skins, all that kind of stuff moving down. The Boer republics actively tried to prevent the sale of firearms to their black subjects, but fail in this. So resolutions of the Volksraad of the South African Republic, a resolution to its field cornets, state that firearms and ammunition shall not be granted or given in exchange to native tribes, indicates that this was taking place, indicates that there was smuggling going on. If you're smuggling firearms, you need to pay for them. One of the easiest things to smuggle is diamonds. Diamonds are small, you can hide them fairly easily. And after the closing down of the gun trade in Griekenland West, people needed to have capital to be able to buy firearms. One of the ways in which this was done was by smuggling diamonds. And we have reports from the 1870s onwards on African chieftains beyond the colony who are given supplies of diamonds by returning migrant laborers. We know this for a fact for Sikukuni, we know this for Chief Kama, and we also will find information for other chiefs as well. And this is specifically to be able to purchase firearms. Now, on the kinds of firearms being purchased, people were well aware of the differences between muskets and cartridges. The only problem with cartridges is that you need bullets, whereas with a musket load or front loaders, you can create gunpowder by yourself and you can create bullets by yourself. The only real difficult thing is the barrel and the breech. So I've tried to answer your question.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Anybody else wanting to chip in, or do I carry on my
Yes, can I?
conversation? Oh, please, yes.
Sure. Thank you, JB, for a brilliant presentation. What I was curious to know, you have lots of quotes from travelers who provide and who observe Africans taking guns from the diamond fields, and there seemed to be a consistent tone of fascination. Now, what I know from later periods in those settler societies was that there was a profound anxiety amongst the white population at large at the arming of Africans. And I was wanting to know if you at all had an impression from your sources as to what are the white diggers thinking about Africans openly carrying weapons in and around the diamond fields. Are they displaying any anxiety that we can sort of map onto later attitudes, or can you not find anything to that effect? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good comment, because it's one that I've been thinking about myself. I was really surprised to see that Rhodes was all for the trade in weapons, that Rhodes was against the disarmament and the banning of the trade. But for instance, somebody like that, General Sir Arthur Thurlow Cunningham, the Lieutenant Governor of the Cape Colony, talking about all these firearms, and then he says, these will now be used against the colonists. I guess most central to this would have been the Boer republics. The Boer republics, who were very anxious to prevent the arming of African polities. The one group of returning migrants who are attacked by the commando near Bloemhof, the main point of concern for the people in Griqualand West colony was that these people had passes and were, formally speaking, allowed to move with their firearms. But it's a strange thing, because on the one hand, there's a fear of black people with firearms. On the other hand, I mean, the sons of Shepstone, Shepstone, who then asks people to submit their firearms, allow them to be confiscated, that his own sons are actually trading firearms. It's a quite interesting hypocrisy. So, yeah, thank you. It's not really an answer to a question. It's just saying, yeah, I'm struggling with this point as well.
Any more questions?
Can I, Giacomo?
Yeah, absolutely, Karen.
Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Jan, for your very interesting and entertaining presentation. I have a question about the monetization of the economy and how this influenced the gun trade, because of course, where mines are located and where wage labor grows and wages are paid, also this means an increase in the circulation of money. And so I was wondering how this influenced the gun trade and also the types of exchanges that were made. You talked about exchange of diamonds with guns, but I was wondering if with the monetization of the economy, so I mean the introduction of coins that circulated, this changed, and if this had also an influence on the prices of guns. And second question, perhaps also, you mentioned this extension of the area in which guns were traded, and I was wondering if you have the sources to map this area in which guns were traded and used, so how these were extended from say the places where they were introduced thanks to the migration of laborers from the mines.
Thank you for your questions. Your first question is a series of questions, but it comes down to essentially money versus diamonds. As long as laborers are earning money, it's worth it to them to exchange diamonds for money to be able to buy firearms. As soon as that is no longer possible, it becomes more important to them to keep diamonds found and exchange them later on for firearms elsewhere. So your question is really interesting because I haven't thought about it yet. I haven't really thought this through properly. But I'm just thinking, why would somebody like Cecil John Rhodes be for the trade in firearms? Because it prevents the smuggling of diamonds. It means that you are able to continue to control the market in terms of diamond supply. It's a very interesting question. So that's the first point. That's the first question I've tried to answer. The second point is one which shows me that you're a historian of money and money flows. You know, you'd have to have somebody. And can I plot this on a map? Well, I can plot various things on the map, but I can't really plot what you're looking for. The archives, as far as I know them, are not detailed enough to allow for that. And the other point is that for early Kimberley and for early Klipdrift and those places, we have so little detailed tax records for the early years up until 1880. So for 15 years, from about 1865 to 1880, we have newspaper reports, we have diaries, we have letters, but we don't have really a detailed bureaucracy which details that trader X or Y has been selling firearms and has done this for this amount and has paid that amount of tax on them. So I certainly would not be able to map that on a map. I mean, then there's another added point, and that is the fact that from 1884 and actually from 1888 onwards, Kimberley becomes a company town. And a company town means that the company determines everything. And now in 2025, that company still determines that records of the company in that time are not open to the public. And I know I've tried the last 4 years to get into them. So, yeah. So I'm trying to answer your question. I can't answer it properly.
Yeah, Jan, may I ask a question? Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. That was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciated the way that you have used sources, visual sources, in order to get information. And I was wondering if from the sources you say you can also get information on the preferences of the African buyers, no, on weapons, no, because we have divided we have identified two macro categories, muskets, breech loaders, but there are many models, many types, and in other part of Africa, from my experience, there were definitely some preferences for some models, and so I want to know if you were able to identify information about this aspect.
I personally have not been able to identify that, but I'm sure that people would be able to do so. I find it really interesting that there is a demand for breech loaders. There's a serious demand for breech loaders. And that might just be the same as that, why are people crazy about the iPhone 27.6 or whatever? Whereas an iPhone 16 does exactly the same. It might also, it's also status acquisitions, I guess, that kind of stuff. There's interesting photographs of Herero chiefs in the 1870s holding double-barreled rifles, which are clearly not front-loaded rifles. They're breech loaders. So it's interesting. I haven't been able to do it. It's not really I'm not a total gun nut, so I'm sorry, but this would be an interesting thing to do. Yeah. Archaeologically, it would also be very interesting. I mean, looking at
Right.
shell casing, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
You see, but because sorry if I can chip in, this takes us back to the question of African usages. Because, I mean, one of your sources, I hope I heard you correctly, suggests sales over a period of 10 years, right? Of 400,000 muskets plus rifles. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's hugely significant.
Yeah.
And so this is why I don't think, well, this is why I think uses other than military are part of your story.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, why would you need all these bloody guns? You know what I mean? So what were actually commoners, let's put it this way, doing with these guns? Were they forms of investment? Were they status symbols? So yeah, were they I don't know, in some areas did they take the place of cattle as a kind of bank? Or you sort of freeze your resources and then part way with them if and when the needs arise. So these are questions which at some stage over the course of your project you may want to tackle, because otherwise it's difficult to account for this enormous level of sales. But anyway, yeah, that's more a comment than a question, actually.
No, I agree. I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, you go on, Alessandro.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you again thank you very much for your presentation. I also have a comment / a question on this point. Maybe to try to understand where are all these guns going. And I was very impressed by your reference to the connection that you made between the diamond fields and the importance of the diamond fields and the labor on the diamond for Moshoeshoe and his success. And I was wondering, you also mentioned that, yes, part of this success was due to the guns that were brought back by the laborers, the Basuto laborers. But you also mentioned about taxation to the other migrants that were just passing through. It would be, for example, interesting to know if these taxes and these fees were also taxes in kind, and therefore taxes in ammunition or guns. And if all, like how many, to try to quantify how many of these ammunition and guns actually stayed in Basuto land through the diamond fields, for example.
Nice question, Alessandro. I wish I had the details. I mean, what's the guy's name? Ettore Morelli.
Yeah.
Go talk to Ettore about Basuto and money and that kind of and firearms. But what struck me was the fact that Moshoeshoe sits athwart this route, a safe route going up to the north. And so Bapedi migrant laborers are going down to Port Elizabeth already in the 1850s, and they're going through Lesotho or Basutoland. So they're going through Moshweshwe's territory. So the migrant labor isn't a new thing. And migrant laborers are going from the very beginning, and I know that because I've seen that from the 1850s onwards, firearms become really important. Would we be able to recreate the amounts? I mean, possibly somewhere in the People's Republic of Lesotho. I know it's not a People's Republic, but somewhere in the Kingdom of Lesotho, somebody has some report by some missionary on the amount of weapons coming through. I don't know. Nobody's ever done research on that. We just know that returning migrants were granted right of passage on payment of goods. And these were firearms and ammunition and yeah. But I mean, I don't have the detailed sources on this. And just let me emphasize, I'm not a historian of firearms. This is way out of my comfort zone.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, you know what you could do? Just unless there's a question, you know what you could do, Jan-Bart? Do that for us for in 5 or 10 minutes. Now, tell us a bit something about the broader project of which this paper is part. You know, what exactly is this large-scale environmental history of Kimberley that you're working on, so that we all find out what's the score with you. Cheers.
So Kimberley is the most important place in Southern Africa. Without Kimberley, contemporary South Africa, contemporary Botswana, contemporary Zimbabwe, contemporary Zambia, none of that would exist. Kimberley lies at the basis of contemporary South Africa because of a symbiotic relationship between mining capital controlled by Cecil John Rhodes and political power. A symbiotic relationship which starts in 1870 and carries through until 2012. A symbiotic relationship in which mining capital and politics create a deal in which they say they play the long game. They play the long game. I'll invest 5 million in the coming year and we'll get returns over the coming 15 years, which will be 30 million or something like that. I don't know. But it's a long game. And that changes in 2012. The symbiotic relationship starts in Kimberley because Kimberley provides the capital for Cecil John Rhodes to become the richest man on earth. Exactly the same as Elon Musk is the richest man on earth and buys his way into power. And he buys his way into power not purely for political aims, but the realization that politics also influences economy and that you can use politics to make sure that your business grows. That's the one side. The other side is Kimberley lies at the basis of the economic development of South Africa and Southern Africa, but is now a backwater. Kimberley is a provincial capital of South Africa. It is the only provincial capital in South Africa with a declining population. It is the only provincial capital in South Africa where the BMW dealer has closed its doors, and the BMW dealer closed its doors in April last year, which means that even people in the administration, public administration, are not getting enough kickbacks to be able to buy the BMWs. Looking at Kimberley, we see that the mine is gone, but the effects of the mine continue on into the present. And those effects are not just social, cultural, but they're also environmental. And I'm interested in those. So the project I'm looking at looks at the geology and geography of Kimberley. The geology that allowed for diamonds to be there, the geography that determined the environment which is possible in Kimberley. A geography and an environment which is arid. So the second bit looks at water and wood, looks at the impact of water and wood. When the first diamonds are found, they are found underneath a tree. Within 15 years, all trees within 250 kilometers of Kimberley are gone. They're chopped down. By 1884, you're sourcing trees from as far away as the Cedarburg and Tsitsikamma forest to be able to feed Kimberley with wood. Exactly the same with water. Water has to be drawn on as well. Not only that, you also need food and fodder. Food for people and fodder for animals. Where is this coming from? This has an enormous impact on the economy of what would later become Lesotho and the Orange Free State. The growth of the supply of consumable goods to Kimberley, it also leads to the kickstarting of something as stupid as, for instance, the snook fishing industry of the Western Cape. This food and fodder is used for mussels and miners. Miners, not only human beings, but also animals. For instance, ponies used in the mines, horses, mules, donkeys, oxen, etc., etc. And what people forget is that until the railway line gets to Kimberley in 1886, each and every single thing in Kimberley is brought there by muscle power, by people or by animals carrying this there. So in Kimberley, there's massive wealth which is created. 2.2 metric tons of diamonds from the Kimberley Big Hole alone. You have to realize that Kimberley is based on 7 diamond pipes. Each one of those diamond pipes has been diamondiferous, and each one of them has been mined. These 7 diamond pipes are all within a circumference of 5 kilometers. The wealth that came out of Kimberley is phenomenal. The waste continues on into the present. The flora and fauna of the Northern Cape and South Africa as a whole has been changed by Kimberley. The politics, culture, economies of South Africa have been changed. That's what I'm looking at.
That's very exciting. No, do you want to carry on? I think that you've given us an impromptu second presentation. No, it's excellent. So I guess we wish you every success with this broader project, which I understand is reasonably well funded as well. So I'm sure you'll pull it off in style. And I guess at this stage, we'll bring proceedings to an end, thanking you, Jan-Bart, most profusely, giving you a virtual round of applause, and well, eagerly expecting round 2, as it were, in Bologna in September.
Thank you all. Where is Miss Palava disappeared to? Aha, Karen, I have now found you on my screen again. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time and the trouble to invite me. Thank you.
It was lovely having you, and looking forward to discussing more in Bologna in September.
Sharp.